episode 53 of Last Turn. I'm Bart, and I'm joined by Evan. What's going on?
Hey, I'm doing nothing. I'm not even podcasting.
I don't know about that. I guess. No, yeah, no, you are.
Yeah, okay, so you caught me. I was actually doing two things. I'm podcasting and I'm lying.
Yeah,
So
and now you're
that's
explaining.
I'm up to a lot. Yeah, I'm a busy guy. It's true. There's a lot of busy guys nowadays.
Indeed. So, yeah, Hearthstone's a game. A set came out, and there's some cards in it, and that's changed the way the metagame looks.
It's quite an introduction to an episode, we know. Stick with us.
um, so we wanted to talk about the metagame again in this episode, but we wanted to dive into a very specific part of it. So Rogue is very prevalent and very strong.
To put it lightly.
Yeah, definitely. So we wanted to dive into this deck a little bit and talk about how it plays, what makes it so good, the ways to play against it, and generally how to approach, I guess, this kind of metagame, but where you have one deck that is like clearly dominant. And by dominant, we mean that it has the highest win rate and it is like the most played deck at reasonably high ranks, and it's been like that for several weeks, at least according to VS's data.
Hmm.
So in the population, it's probably not that far off from that. And personally, I played against that deck a lot,
Hmm. Same.
and I'm sure you have too. Yeah.
It's a specific definition we're using. This dominant deck, it's not just winning a lot, it's also being played a lot. And like you said, specifically, it's been number one in those two places for a meaningful amount of time. That's pretty uncommon in
Oh yeah.
Hearthstone. We know that Druid has done it at least once before, probably for a longer period in its day, but Rogue's day doesn't seem to be done yet, so maybe Rogue will outdo Jade Druid this time, but either way, it's much more of a significant, meaningful thing to talk about because surely everyone, if you haven't already played this deck, you played against it a bunch. If you're me, you've lost against it a lot. And with any number of classes, even classes and decks that are maybe meant to beat it, like Fatigue Warrior, any kind of Control Warrior, I believe would be argued to be a good strategy against Rogue in general, and this specific Rogue deck we're going to talk about, but I've still lost in profound ways in spite of that. So there's a lot to unpack here.
I think so. Yeah, it's an interesting deck. I think it has there's a lot to it, and hopefully we're going to go into that. But definitely, it is notable that this deck has been as prevalent as it is, and has had the win rate that it's had, relative to other decks for as long as it has. That like you said is uncommon. Jade Druid, in Frozen Throne was like the last time that this really happened. It's what typically happens is that one week you have a strong deck that's played a lot, and then the next week, that deck is maybe played less or it's winning less. Maybe it's played more and it's winning less. But these things adjust, right? Because if something is common, you can build decks that counter it, and then those decks become more prevalent, and so the win rate of the initial deck goes down. But that's not what's happened with Rogue. So why is that? Yeah, what we can that's a reasonable place to start. What has made this deck so resilient? What strength does it have that has kept it around for so long, or what weaknesses does it lack?
I think the most obvious answer to that is the nature of the deck. We haven't even really named it yet, but
Yeah.
you're saying this is Tempo Rogue
Yes.
that is doing this, and that has been a deck before. It brings back memories of 7 mana Bone Mare.
Oh yeah.
Rest in peace. And that deck was maybe not. I don't think it pulled off the play rate accolade that this current Tempo Rogue has, but it certainly had a very high win rate for a while.
Yes.
And part of that was because it's such a versatile, effective strategy in Hearthstone in general to be playing tempo the way Rogue does, which is having a good deal of minions that also take care of your opponent's minions.
Definitely.
And this deck, I don't think is an exception. I think it also has a good deal of that, though it's kind of a mixture. It's kind of doing it a little differently because it kind of does that, but in a unique way with Wagglepick and Dread Corsair.
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe in the past it wouldn't have been. I couldn't have been so certain about a pair of Hearthstone cards and how often they affect a game, but I think every Tempo Road deck is also going to use 2 raiding parties.
Oh yeah.
And raiding party will frequently draw you 1, if not 2, Dread Corsairs, and almost 100% of the time will draw you Wagglepick in the deck that these people are playing. So you will frequently have these 2 cards together, and then turn 4 you can play Wagglepick, kill something, and play Dread Corsair for free. So even though Dread Corsair in and of itself and Wagglepick in and of itself isn't this obvious 2-for-1 like Vile Spine Slayer or SI7 Agent, Vile Spine is not even legal, right?
Yeah.
So that's like an old example. But these obvious 2-for-1s, it isn't that, but it still essentially allows you to do that, to put value on the board and take away from them in a very mana efficient way.
Yeah, I think so Vile Spine is a great. I'm happy that you went there quickly because I think that is like when reflecting on this deck and its place in the metagame and why it might exist, I think Vile Spine is a very natural place to go because that seems like so much of the reason that Tempo Rogue used to be strong. Because Vile Spine is it's everything you want in a Tempo deck. It's one card that deletes your opponent's mana and takes them down a card and puts you up a minion. That's like when you're playing Tempo game, that's like the golden goose. That's everything you're trying to do in that deck is like a part of that, some combination of those things, and Vile Spine does it all.
And as a good-sized body, 3-4 can be plenty relevant in really any point of a Hearthstone game.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about this current metagame where 3-3 is such a common and important stat line, just 3 power, like in Ziliax and in, most of the offensive package of this Tempo Rogue deck in SI7 Agent and Dread Corsair, like 3-4 is pretty meaty. So if you compare it to the current metagame, it'd be really good. In the metagame it existed, it was also good. There was a lot of stuff that was much like lower to the ground, I think, back then. But also, minions sizes could change because of Bone Mare.
Yeah, that is probably happening less. There's also no Fungal Mancer.
That's true. Is that that was in Kobolds, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this deck is really strong, and I think that definitely going to Wagglepick and Dread Corsair is an excellent place to go because, like, let's think about what this is doing. I think that an alternate name for this deck is Lackey Rogue, but I think that Pirate Rogue would be a better name.
There's a lot of pirates, and they're always there.
Yeah, so this deck is at its absolute strongest when it plays a Wagglepick on turn 4 and at least 1 Dread Corsair, because that is an enormous tempo swing.
Playing Wagglepick turn 3 off coin ain't bad either.
Yeah, that is a great thing to do. And I mean, a great many games are decided by just having Wagglepick and Dread Corsair. So like, when I'm playing that deck, if I get Preparation and Raiding Party in my opening hand, I definitely keep them.
Yeah, it's such a so that's an excellent value that leads to this crazy tempo swing, playing the Wagglepick and playing the Dread Corsair.
Yeah, and just being able to get that consistently is awesome. And like the games where you do that on turn 4 are really strong, because that's we've seen tempo decks in the past that have done well. A good example is like Secret Mage. If you think about Secret Mage with like the Cabal Crystal Runner, that was really strong. That like just much like Dread Corsair, that got free as you did stuff that you wanted to do, and the rest of that deck was designed around putting secrets on the battlefield, which is the thing you want to do, and those will screw with your opponent's game by taking them off mana, taking them off cards, and a lot of your game plan was to just play them for free, and then eventually you get crystal runners that you can use to run your opponent over in the mid game after you've sort of locked them out of playing with a couple well placed secrets.
Hmm.
So the Dread Corsair coming down for free after you put down a Waggle Pick is really similar to that in that it's just a very undercosted body that comes down after you've played a giant threat, which the Waggle Pick definitely is.
It's easy to underestimate the just pure power of the Waggle Pig itself,
Mm.
and then even easier, I think, to underestimate how huge throwing a couple 3/3 taunts on top of that is. It's monumental.
It's enormous. Especially because like this deck can play some minions, before it plays Waggle Pick, but putting down a taunt to protect them is really good. Like forcing your opponent to attack one particular minion could really screw them up. Maybe
Hmm.
you were lucky enough to play like a Van Cleef that's a 6/6 or something, and now you have a way to protect it. Like
Hmm.
that is a really hard game for your opponent to win.
Absolutely.
Um, and if you're lucky enough to find yourself in that situation, you're playing against like another person who doesn't have sap in their deck, then you're probably going to beat them.
For sure.
Um,
Also, Southsea Deckhand
yeah,
can be a removal spell. He can be a bunch of different cards. You might draw one off your raiding party, and he's definitely a much better aggressive play hiding behind a Dread Corsair.
it's true. Yeah, because I mean, he can feel really like derpy if you just play him on one as a 2/1, which is a fine thing to do in some matchups. But uh, or if you just kind of like run him out to do two face damage, it's whatever. He's probably toast. But yeah, if the Corsair is there, then like he might actually kill something or like do some damage and then kill something or like he can do his job a lot better. But definitely, I think that one of the points I wanted to make with Cabal Crystal Runner is that like this deck has taken on the roguish flavor of tempo, which is having cards that do a lot of stuff and cards that sort of set your opponent back tempo while developing your own in SI7 Agent and cards like Backstab.
Hmm.
Um, so it has that element, but it also has the more classic tempo element of just playing undercosted stuff and
Yeah,
trying to get like value specifically onto the board. And it does that with Waggle Pick, which is like truly the centerpiece of the deck.
absolutely.
Um, it is amazing how strong that card is. Like just seeing it seems strong. I think that we definitely talked about it during our set review, but I did not expect it to be quite as central to the metagame as it is.
It didn't seem like it was necessarily better than True Silver Champion, but now it definitely does.
Yeah, it's really clear. And I
Tough
think part of it,
comparison to make, completely different classes, completely different effects, but if I were forced to, like, alright, Evan, you're gonna fight to survive, you're gonna either live or die, do you want a True Silver Champion or a Waggle pick? I would definitely pick the pick.
yeah, it's a lot more than trinket text.
You
The line of
can't get
text on
an
the card.
extra Leroy on your opponent with a True Silver Champion.
Oh yeah, I mean that is basically the dream. That's something we also talked about during our set review. Is just smash your opponent with your Waggle Pick and Leroy twice in one turn to do a billion damage from your hand. That absolutely happens. That has ended a lot of games for me. I played this deck quite a few times. Um, a lot more often, what you're doing is just recurring like an SI7 agent or the 1/5 dude who gives you lackeys. I don't remember what he's called.
Yeah, he's another, I think, big part of this whole thing. Evil Miscreant, that's his
That's the
name.
one.
So
Yeah.
he's actually, in my opinion, a big reason why Wagglepick is as good as it is. Like, if
Yeah.
Wagglepick was an A, that he made an A plus, or if it was an A plus, he made an A plus plus, because being able to get that effect for 1 mana is insane.
Yeah.
And he often will have damage on him because he's a 1/5, so you get to recycle some of that. And just in general, the role Evil Miscreant plays in the deck is also really, really big. The amount of value you get from two lackeys is extremely large,
It's true.
especially in this deck, especially with the ability to return the lackeys to your hand with the Waggle Pick. Like, it
Yeah.
all just, like, mixes together into this really powerful combo. But the Miscreant himself, the 3 mana 1/5, he plays a really big role, I think, in the deck being as good as it is, and whether you're gonna call it Tempo Rogue or Lackey Rogue or something else, you're definitely running two of him.
Yes. Oh yeah, it is incredibly powerful. Definitely agree with you. I think that that's part of the reason why this deck is as strong as it is. And maybe a reasonable target in addition to Waggle Pick if such cards needed to be targeted by somebody for some reason. But uh, yeah, like if you just looked at this deck in isolation and said like, okay, well we have Waggle Pick and some pirates, and we try to cheat on mana, like Paladin could do that with True Silver Champion and Dread Corsair. Paladin has done that in the past.
Hmm.
Um, but what really makes this deck like and just takes it over the edge is being able to use the miscreant, recur the miscreant, and like the lackeys themselves are really high value 1 mana cards. Like they give you way more than 1 mana worth of value per lackey. They're and I'd say like on average each one is worth a card or close to a card.
So
So
he's like a he's like a 3-for-1 because you get a 1/5 plus two more cards that are worth a card. You can return them to your hand with the Waggle Pick. You can return the lackeys to your hand with the Waggle Pick. Plus the lackeys cost 1, so they're excellent for triggering all of your combo effects,
yes,
like on Evil Miscreant.
yeah, right, exactly. It triggers itself. And yeah, that was the last point I wanted to make that you made there is that like all those 1 mana cards are 1 mana cards, and Rogue loves those because Rogue has combo. So
You also get to
every,
discover a spell, so if like sometimes if you just need more cards in your hand, it'll hook you up there.
oh man, that reminds me. I was playing a game earlier today, and it was a Tempo Rogue mirror. So my opponent played Van Cleef, and I sapped it, and
Hmm.
he played it again, and I had the second sap, so I sapped it again. Um, and then he played it
Sure.
again, and I discovered a sap, and I sapped it a third time.
Oh my
I
god.
did eventually beat him, and it was brought to you by Sap.
WhatsApp.
It was good.
Brought to you by
Um,
WhatsApp.
thank you. No, Tencent is WeChat. Brought to you by WhatsApp. I think WhatsApp is Facebook. Um,
It's not Skype, which is what we're actually using and should actually give a shout out to.
yeah, shout out to Microsoft. You may have heard of them. Um, they used to be relevant.
And they successfully purchased a very effective piece of software.
Yeah, called Minecraft.
Yes, I was about to go there and you beat me to it. Well played.
um,
As rogues
yeah,
do, right?
yeah, it's Rogues too. Yeah, so this is a strong deck, and I think we've gone into like a lot of the individual components here. The
Not all
overall,
of them.
no, no, certainly not all of them. But
The
so what else is there?
well, I think so the lackeys also can play a role in the sort of roguish tempo effect you were talking about. Like one of them just does 2 damage and gives you a minion.
Mm,
So or can transform your minion so you use your uh 3/3 or 1/5 to kill their guy and then transform it so you can take guys off of their board and accumulate more on your side in one card and be very efficient. It's also deadly. There's just the hero power, like it's Rogue, so they have the
oh yeah,
hero power. There's a predominantly powerful deck that isn't in Rogue that's Token Druid, and having Rogue's hero power against Token Druid is really, really good. So another reason the deck works and is as good as it is because it has an innate way to deal with something like Token Druid, which is another strong strategy right now. Deadly Poison will also give you tempo. You get to spend just 1 card and kill 2 3 health minions with something like Deadly Poison. And you can get away with using Deadly Poison because you're using Dread Corsair. Um, and another unique thing that makes the Rogue deck, whether it's, you call it Tempo Rogue or Lackey Rogue, is how much reach it has.
mm-hmm.
So that's another one of those words. There's like tempo and these metagame and words that people use, and some maybe too often they're describing different things with the same word. So the way I look at reach is your opponent has either stabilized or is nearly stabilized. Can you finish them off? If you have a
Right,
lot of reach, you can, and if you don't, you can't.
right.
So let's examples are like the most useful thing here. Burn Mage or Freeze Mage, a ton of reach. You know, your
A deck
opponent could have a
filled with reach.
huge reach, whole barricade of Void Lords,
Mm,
you know, and just I don't care, fireball, 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 power blast, you know, and you're dead.
right.
That's like that's top tier reach, right? Is just direct face damage. Face Hunter is also notorious for having that reach because of cards like Kill Command, their hero power, which just goes over everything's head. You know, if you have like a great minion out like a Naz Dormu and your opponent's at 30, but you're at 6 and they're a hunter, they're just gonna time is not on your favor, not in your favor in that situation. No matter what you do, unless you gain health or armor, they're gonna be able to, without putting anything on the board, finish you off. So
Mm.
they don't need tempo at a how much tempo do they need to win, and if they lose control of the board, can they finish you off? It's great to be able to accumulate a ton of tempo on the board and take out your opponent's stuff and make your own stuff, which this rogue deck does. This rogue deck also has an insane amount of reach and is really good at finishing people off even when they're either stabilized or close to stabilizing. One of the main reasons is Sap. Sap is just such a good card.
Yeah,
Getting
sap is really really important in this deck.
It's one of the most difficult things to play against in the current meta, I think. And the more you're on your back foot, the more devastating Sap is. So it's almost like the effectiveness of Sap is being amplified by how much tempo effectiveness the deck has, but it also has Sap. And then Leroy, and to top it all off, sort of the real main source of the reach here is once again Wagglepick.
Yeah,
Because you can get all of this face damage in with this weapon, you can clear minions with it, you can bounce your Leroy back to your hand, you can play Captain Greenskin and get an extra, what is it, like 6 or 7 damage off of your Wagglepick, which is a lot of damage. If you're at 6, an extra 6 is quite a lot.
oh yeah.
So the deck's ability and eviscerates South Sea Deckhand. It's got SI7 agent. It has ways to do direct damage. It has a bunch of charge minions. It has a bunch of ways to amplify its weapons and play weapons, and it has ways to just get your guys out of the way.
Yeah, so it has it
like
all.
This is what crushed me when I was playing Warrior.
Mm,
Is that you think you're safe and then you're not.
no, it's yeah. I mean, sap is really important for that because like it's not a viable strategy against this deck to just play a big thing and make it big and hard to kill. Like Rogue can deal with it. It has sap, so this card is like very important. You know, against would-be control decks because it keeps them honest. It keeps them from just slamming down a taunt and then like armoring up or drawing cards or whatever. It just means they can get right through that and smash your face with whatever they have on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a deck that can like it has a lot of damage in its cards. I mean, you know, some of the lackeys do direct damage. Deadly Poison, South Sea Deckhand, SI7 Agent, Leroy Jenkins. These are all gonna do damage from hand. Wagglepick is basically a charge minion that you can't kill. So it unless you have like very specific and narrow cards. So that is a yeah. This is a deck that's filled with damage from hand for sure. But sap kind of makes that possible. It means that like you can't shut it down. You can't stop it from using all of these cards to kill you.
Yeah,
And
you can sometimes maybe you wouldn't want to consider a charge minion just raw face damage or a weapon just raw face damage, but with 2 copies of sap, and also, you know, you can sometimes just play it for 0 mana with preparation. That's pretty good too. Also, backstab 0 mana, get a cheap taunt out of the way that has low health, like that helps too. It really does have an extreme amount of face damage.
yeah, it's and sap is what drives that home. I remember seeing that in like when the early list came out, they did not include sap. And you know, they quickly evolved to have sap like within the first week. But I remember seeing it and like really kind of questioning it. I wasn't sold on Sap,
Hmm.
but I, decided to try it out. And like after playing with it a bit, it's a little tough to get used to. But once you get used to this card and figure out when the right times to play it and like how to use it to keep ahead and just like absolutely destroy your opponent, bait them into committing and then sapping, it's just so
Hmm.
good. It is central to the deck. Like it means that if you do a good enough job keeping, like your opponent's playing Hunter, and you do a good enough job of keeping their board clear of mechs so that they can't do any magnetize, like it means that they have to commit like 2 cards at once from their hand to get a reasonable size minion out, and then you just sap them, and like they can't win anymore.
You can play them into the corner. You can leave that as their only out, and then have the out to their out.
Yes, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
very roguish.
It's extremely roguish, and I mean, they have like it's that deck is like any sort of like tempo v tempo kind of a matchup. It really depends on opening hands. Um, but sap is like an important way uh to deal with them coming back from behind. It like prevents them from doing that, and it prevents control. It prevents control opponents from playing taunt. Not that there's a whole lot of that in the metagame right now, but like that's in part because there's sap. So
Yeah, and I don't know how much more Resurrect Priest would matter, but it definitely is pretty brutal that it doesn't, like the fact that it doesn't kill the minion is pretty important in that matchup, right? So
that's
that's
true.
just another bonus, like add to all of the great things about Sap. Also in this particular matchup, it's got like a cripplingly nice piece of subtext to it.
Yeah, and I think Sap also is doing a good job of keeping like Blessing of Kings out of the metagame.
Yeah,
Um,
that almost seemed like it would be right back into whatever, if there were a paladin deck that was playing secrets and being aggressive, or just being some kind of an aggressive paladin deck, it would be running 2 copies of that.
yeah, absolutely, of course, yeah, that card's fantastic, and um, Sap just makes it irrelevant. Like, because you could imagine just like starting from okay, well, let's take True Silver Champion, Captain Greenskin, 2 Dread Corsairs, and 2 Southsea deckhands, and now like that's our core for a Paladin deck. And then of course you get a Blessing of Kings, but then like no, Sap is there, and you can't beat that.
Yeah, it basically what you're describing is like the deck we're talking about now, but just worse, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a worse version of this deck.
A version of this deck that is weak to this deck.
Yes, it's a version of this deck that's bad against this deck.
It's a
That's
bad
not a good
pick.
place to be.
That's not
You
a
can't.
waggle pick.
No, it's not. So this is I think that's really like the biggest strength of this deck is the amount of face damage it has and the amount of reach it has. So like it can just take all of these cards and convert them to damage. Um, the mirrors tend to be incredibly explosive. Like
Hmm.
it's kind of a tempo fight, but both players are just taking damage to actually deal with the stuff that's getting put on the board.
And
And
trying to
then
estimate like what, like measure each other up, like how much face damage does he have, how much, like how close can I get to, like 12 or something, like can I go to 11, like what does this guy have in his hand, and is sacrificing this little bit of life worth the tempo, or does he's got 4 cards now, I can't go that low anymore.
yeah,
It's
and
like a
like
game of chicken.
it's yeah, it's very much like a lot of it's sizing your opponent up is really important in that matchup. And a lot of like presenting. Like sometimes you just have to like present that you have a particular card to force them to play it a certain way. Like a good example of that is like if you're fighting a rogue and they if you have an empty board and the rogue daggers up on turn 2 and smacks your face, they very likely have a waggle pick. Because that is
Hmm.
like what you would do if you had a waggle pick.
Exactly.
So it's important like if you're playing as a rogue against a rogue like to do stuff like that to force them to commit. If you think that you can deal with what they commit, you have to think about what they'd actually be playing on turn 3. um anyway, yeah, it's a lot of trying to think about how much damage your opponent can have when you can afford to go face, because once you start going face, like your opponent has 2 options. They can either say like, all right, well, I'm going to go all in too and start smashing his face and I'm going to win the race. Or they can think like, oh, he's going face because if he smacks me a couple more times, he can kill me with what's in his hand. So I need to kill his stuff. And if you can trick your opponent into playing from the back foot and killing your stuff, then like they're going to be using their resources to delete your minions, and you're going to be using yours to push base damage, and you're going to win the matchup.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, that is yet another reason why breaking down this deck and really understanding it, because you can also use those strategies if you're not playing Rogue. If you're playing some other tempo deck, maybe
oh yeah,
specifically, you can be thinking about, well, actually, if I just go face here, that kind of needs that might make them think about what they need to do in a completely different way and get them to play the way that would actually win me the game.
yeah, it's important to know. Yeah, it's important to know like how you have to play and like how you actually win games, and like not playing to not lose, but playing to win. Um, these are all important concepts, and like one of the best things you can do is make your opponent think that control your opponent's thoughts in some way. It's just like make them think that you're doing something that you're not doing, or just
Hmm.
make them think that you're doing a particular thing, whether or not you're doing it.
Yeah.
Is pretty powerful. So
Hmm.
I
Give
think
them
we
the
talked.
wrong scent.
Oh yeah. Um, so I think we talked a lot about what makes this deck strong, and I think we've mentioned. Um, I guess actually there may be two cards in the deck that we haven't mentioned yet. There's Myra's Unstable Element.
Yep.
Um,
That is, I think that ultimately just is sort of like another like piece of the reach element.
I
How
think so.
this deck has reach. I think it's also worth mentioning Togwaggle's scheme. I don't think most rogue decks are using it, but there are some rogue decks that maybe wouldn't call themselves tempo rogue, but would specifically want to be called lackey rogue, that use the legendary King Togwaggle and also use Togwaggle's scheme, and they can also have this insane amount of longevity and reach against fatigue decks and
Mm.
slower decks.
So Togwaggle is there are some tempo rogue decks that are running Togwaggle, and they're just like cutting deadly poisons basically.
That, I mean, it's so easy to get the lackeys with the miscreant.
Yeah, right. So it runs it'll like go it'll include one or two cable rats, and it
Okay.
will include Togwaggle, and that just gives you like an incredible value that you can use.
It's an insane finisher. It's extremely difficult to predict. It
Yes.
can. I mean, I had someone, they played King Togwaggle and then played Preparation and played one of the 3 mana spell treasures, and I was like, I didn't even think of that. They're just
Oh yeah.
playing this insanely unfair Hearthstone card. The same turn they play this 5, and he's a 5/5.
Yeah, he's a
Other
chunky guy.
times they played Togwaggle, got an amazing card, and then hit me with their last durability of Waggle Pick and put their Togwaggle back in their hand.
Yep, I've done that. It feels good.
It can be, yeah, so not just Togwaggle's scheme, but Togwaggle himself also adds to the potential reach, because not every deck, maybe those are less commonly played, but they're in the wheelhouse. And then when your opponent queues up, you queue up against your opponent and their Valera, that's another thing you have to think about. So we've talked about this. If your opponent could be sporting a number of different cards and strategies that diverge from each other, how you should play against them, that puts you in a worse position,
Oh
and
yeah.
that makes their class and their deck, whichever one of those two divergent decks it is, it makes both of them better. The fact that their opponents won't be able to effectively predict the cards they're going to play and the strategies they're using. And Togwaggle's scheme is very, very different from Waggle Pick or Leroy Jenkins or SI7 Agent. It's a zero value card that puts things in your deck. But the fact that some opponents are going to play it will ultimately have to affect how you play if you want to consistently win. And even if they're not playing that, the King Togwaggle is going to also. It's this huge amount of variance, If they're playing it, what do they get? So it adds not only reach, like there's an amount of damage that isn't gonna kill a fatigue warrior because they're at 30 armor and 30 health.
Mm.
And no matter how many Waggle picks and Leroy Jenkins you have, you're not beating them like that. But you could still just pull off this insane thing with Waggle pick and King Togwaggle and get multiple sets of multiple copies of multiple legendaries and win anyway.
Yeah, it's absolutely, or just like play a bunch of 0 mana cards from your deck that like all do damage to your opponent's face. Um,
Yeah, there's that one spell that it's like a wand, and you draw three
yeah,
cards, and they cost 0. You could play it off prep, so it all costs 0. And another card that we didn't talk about, maybe you're about to mention, is Fan of Knives.
yeah, that has stopped showing up in the mainline lists. In part because I don't think it's that good in the mirror, but it is a
hmm
card that can be in the deck.
And so in that way, it falls into this same area of because it exists and because it could be done, it will make the decks that do or don't use it better.
Yeah,
But basically, as Token Druid, which is one of, I think, the most effective counters to this deck, becomes more popular, Rogue can just use more Fan of Knives, which is a really good card against Token Druid, which is one of the best other decks.
yeah,
So Rogue, this amazing tempo deck, also, as it sees fit, can just include this amazingly good card against one of the other best decks in the format.
yeah. It's very strong. Like it's the versatility. You know, the rogue class is a versatile class in general. It can do like a fair. Its cards are all really weird, but it does have access to a pretty large set of effects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, Fan of Knives is definitely like an example of a card that's potentially useful in some environments. You know, Druid being really common is one of those environments, but like right now, I think it's not the right card. But it is there and it can be there
Yeah, it definitely was being included a lot more at the beginning
initially.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was also more Token Druid then. And I think the fact that, like, it's sort of like there would have been more control decks being played when the Caverns Below was less nerfed. You know,
Mm,
like part of the reason Rogue is so popular and so effective is because Token Druid is popular and effective, and Fan of Knives exists.
yeah. It's yeah, no, I agree with that.
And the hero
So
power too. I've queued up with Rogue against and was met with Druid and been like, uh-oh, this is gonna be tough. And I was on the play, and I just hero power turn 2, and I just hero power every other turn, and there was no problem.
right.
Using
Yeah, I
0
mean
Fan of Knives, not a single copy in my deck, but they just couldn't, between the lackeys and the SI7 agents and hero power, they could backstab, they just couldn't get anywhere anyway.
right. Yeah, Rogue is very good at keeping the board clear. Which is like it's interesting. It means that there's like certain types of decks you really can't play against it, like ones that are trying to play like a fair tempo game.
hmm
Um, they'll just lose to Rogue's hero power. And also like, you know, in the Rogue mirror, like you really don't want to play SI7 on turn 1 if you're on the coin because it's gonna not SI7, deckhand, because it's gonna die.
It's
Like,
gonna die to half of not a card.
yes, it's gonna die to less
Just a
than a
bad
card.
deal.
Way less than a card. You're basically just discarding that card from your hand. Uh, so
Yeah, it turns out half of 0 is still not very much.
it's true. Um, so we've talked a lot about what makes this deck strong, and I think we've talked about all. We've at least mentioned every single card in the deck at this point. Um,
I think
but
so.
I think
Henchclan Thug.
yeah, that shows up sometimes.
It's just
I think that
insanely good.
yeah, it's good. I think that like not it's a real big non-bow with Waggle Pick. So I think that it's like not in the most
That's
refined
true.
lists, but it does
Yeah,
show up sometimes.
that's true. Yeah, like Blink Fox works a lot better and is also kind of safer. Like your Henchclan Thug, if they use removal on it, or if they sap it, you'll definitely feel bad if they sap it, but you
Mm.
don't feel that bad if they sap your Blink Fox.
Yeah, it's tough. Like Blink Fox is a fantastic card that could potentially be in some version of this deck, but 3 is like really crowded. Like you have Miscreants, you have Raiding Party, you have SI7 Agent, you have Van Cleef, and you just have Coin Waggle Pick. So like those are all turn 3 plays that are in the deck. Like it barely even has room for Blink Fox, but it's a good card. And if there were a lot of value-based decks out there, like Blink Fox totally see play. So I think we've talked at this point we've talked about a lot of the cards that could conceivably be in this deck or are actually in this deck, but I think it would be helpful to go over I guess the weaknesses that this deck has and some that it does not have. So I think an interesting place to start is that kind of like any other tempo deck, like this deck is really good at not running out of steam, but it can run out of steam. I think particularly against Control Warrior and Bomb Warrior, which are the best matchups against this deck, actually, at least according to the stats. So
even better than Token Druid, I see.
Yeah. So it's aggro decks that are trying to assemble 30 damage and just like put it in your opponent's face, they are spending their cards to do face damage. But if they spend all their cards and they haven't done enough face damage, and the opponent is like able to undo their work, maybe through a hero power, an armor up or something, then that can put these decks in a really bad spot. And this deck is absolutely not immune to that. It's really good at not having that happen because so many of its cards create value, like Raiding Party and Evil Miscreant both draw cards. And, among other things, like Myra's Unstable Element just means that like you can blow your cards as irresponsibly as you want and then draw all the stuff you need to assemble lethal.
Yeah, ideally as irresponsibly as you want.
Yeah. If things are going well, you're just eviscerating their face on turn 3. But it can run out of gas with slow draws, or if your opponent just has all the answers, or you don't pace your threats well enough such that you like lose too many of them to one card or something like that.
That's one of the few places it just sort of will flop, is if it's legitimately top decking, because a lot of its best things to do are gonna have combo, like the Miscreant, for example.
Yeah. Or like Heist Baron basically has combo.
Yeah, it definitely is a combo, and but like you said, getting them to that point is not easy because they have so many high value cards.
Yeah. It's
Miscreant and Raiding Party are both basically 3-for-1s for 3 mana.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're like, even if you prep Raiding Party, you're still up cards.
Which is insane.
It's unbelievable. And you're going to be up mana too if you play the Waggle Pick and then a Dread Corsair. Like it is a crazy amount of value. And the deck is really just chock full of that stuff. So like, also, a card like Captain Greenskin, if you have a Waggle Pick equipped and you play Captain Greenskin, that is almost like drawing a card. That's like almost better than drawing a card.
Yeah, it's like drawing a card and it costs 0 because it's already in effect.
Yeah, it's like drawing an Eviscerate and playing it immediately. It's really strong. So this is a deck that's hard to run out of resources, but it can. And playing a control deck against it and forcing it to run out of resources is a good way to win. That's not an easy game to play, and also playing control deck on the ladder means you have to do a control mirror. But it is, when I lose in it spectacularly as I'm playing Tempo Rogue, it's often because I've been depleted.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm facing down an opponent that has over 20 net health, and I have like 2 cards in my hand and like an empty board. That's just the end of the game.
Yeah, I think the way the deck has been evolving has also been going more towards the face idea and further from maybe trying to do combos with King Togwaggle, which only makes the fatigue strategy more effective.
I agree with that. Yeah, I found I initially crafted and included Togwaggle because I thought it would do better in control mirrors. I thought it would be, or not control mirrors, again, the control matchup. I thought it would be a way for me to like eke out value in the late game, such that I can like win games that I otherwise wouldn't. But I actually find that like the games I win against control are the ones where I just explode before they can deal with me. And like I'd rather just have the deadly poisons.
Right. You'd rather just get to that point where you have the advantage rather than try to need to make up for it with the clunky legendary.
Yeah, and like by the time by the time you can play Togwaggle like reliably in a lot of games, between having to draw it and actually having to like meet the conditions to play it. Like they all their answers are turned on. So there's not much you can do between the Togwaggle and whatever you get off of it that's gonna like your opponent's gonna fold to, because they probably have a bunch of stuff in their hand to deal with all of it. They could just like brawl or warpath and it's all dead, or like,
Yeah.
you know, it's cool. It's really good in a mirror where you guys have been just going toe to toe. If you can resolve Heist Baron, like you are super favored. But it is not good in the control matchup.
Right. Yeah, playing catch up like is gonna be tough against that control player. Like they're gonna have like 7 or 8 cards in their hand at the point where you either could have killed them with deadly poison and not need to worry about any of them, or didn't, and now you're not gonna beat their 8 cards with King Togwaggle. You know.
Yeah.
They're not. They're generally in the position of either having the answers but not having the time to play them, or not. So you just got to make sure the first thing happens more, and that's a more effective thing than using King Togwaggle. I think that's often how it ultimately is, but that still means that if they can do their strategy better, it'll work better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's like an interesting point, and it's like almost it's like a hard lesson to learn, but uh making your deck focused is almost never the right way to tech your deck. Like making your deck making your deck less focused is like just not what you want to be doing. Even if you think like you're including a silver bullet, if the silver bullet is off plan, it's rarely the right thing to do. Sometimes it is, like the world of Galaka crawlers. But you know, a 2-mana 2/3 is like barely off plan for any deck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, very hard lesson. So such a tough lesson.
It's a really hard lesson. I mean, I've experimented a lot with and there might be a right way to do this. I've experimented a lot with like putting acidic swamp ooze and the 1-mana 1/2, what is it called? Like
Bloodsail Corsair.
That's the one, Bloodsail Corsair. I've experimented a lot with trying to fit those into this deck, and because I feel like they'd be good in the mirror. You know, sniping your opponent's Waggle pick is amazing. But like, it's hard to know what to cut. You know, at that point, you're looking at cutting like a Cable Rat or Deadly Poisons or like a really good card.
Yeah, it's almost
Deckhand.
counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's tough. And you'd think like, okay, well, you know, I'm in the mirror and I have these tech cards, so I'm slightly favored. And like, even if that's true, in the not mirror, you now just have a bunch of narrow cards that don't do anything. And you know, maybe they can get your opponent Super Collider, but like you're not usually losing to that. You're losing to like that plus everything else. And if they just use it and attack once, like they got the value out of it already. So it's tough to learn that lesson. And like even then, you might not even be super favored in the mirror because you have a bunch of cards that are like aimed at swinging the game a little bit, and your opponent just, instead of having those cards, just has cards that'll beat you.
Right.
So it's a hard lesson to learn that like sometimes those tech cards are just not good.
It's, you know, and the another reason it's the toughie as far as the actual decision, like, do I include this card? Like the Acidic Swamp Ooze, do I play this card? I mean, that card also sounds like it could be good against Wagglepick, right?
Yeah.
So if you're rogue playing, you're like, well, I want to beat Warrior more, and I want to beat their Super Colliders, and that's one of the most difficult cards for me to beat. You know, should I add an Acidic Swamp Ooze? Let me ask myself that question and be like, well, it will affect my other matchups as well, which, oh wait, it's going to be great maybe against another rogue. So it can get really murky and complicated trying to weigh all of the different decks, and then the frequency that you play against the decks, and the frequency you beat the decks, and then, but really, you do need to think about, like, how often the card will actually do something useful.
Yeah, that's true. How often is it just going to be like a 3/2 that you play on curve? How often are you going to just hold it in your hand and then die with it in your hand?
Yeah, that last thing is so easy to underestimate, I think.
Oh yeah, it's really easy to like it's easy to forget about that because you know that's so in a matchup that's not like Rogue or Warrior, you're gonna just play this card, and it's gonna be a a 2 mana 3/2 woohoo. You might deal 3 damage with it. You're probably killing a minion with it. But like, so you're against Rogue and Warrior. Let's say you're against Warrior, and you hold your 2-drop in your hand the rest of the game. Great, they're stoked about that. They're so happy about that.
They would include a card in their deck to make you do that.
Yeah, so that's like at that point you're not even really beating your opponent, you're beating yourself. And if you're playing in Rogue, like that's actually a place where it's reasonable, right? Because like if you play it and take them off their hero power, like that's good. On turn 2, that's a really nice piece of value. If you take a Waggle Pick off later in the game, like that's potentially good too. Maybe they get a little bit of value off the Death Rattle, or maybe they don't. Maybe you screw them up. But the case where it's rotting in your hand is the case where like they're not playing Waggle Pick and they're not hero powering. I don't know if your opponent's doing well in that case, but it sounds to me, if they're not hero powering, like they're playing cards.
Yeah, they're doing something else.
Yeah. So you have a card in your hand that's not doing anything, and they're playing a bunch of cards. So like that's not super good. And I think a great way to just like have that card and have it be terrible is if you just didn't snipe the hero power with it. If you held it for Waggle Pick and just let them have a hero power. I think that'd be a great way to just have that card be a terrible inclusion that would like reduce your win rate as a player.
Which is frustrating because killing a Waggle Pick can be really awesome sometimes.
Yeah, that's the dream. That's the value dream that you want. But like, you're playing in the tempo mirror. It's a tempo matchup.
And another problem is that a lot of players, so because of the deck, you will accidentally be in the spot where if your pick suddenly dies, it's good for you. So that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And then also, good players will arrange for that to be the case if they're suspicious their opponent has weapon removal. So let's say it is like the dream scenario, it still might actually not be the dream scenario. You mentioned HenchClan Thug is going down in prevalence for this reason, and that totally makes sense. You don't want to bounce your HenchClan Thug with your Waggle Pick, and you're drawing Waggle Pick and winning with it every game because you're using Raiding Party. Use that card not in your deck, and now that's also going to make Acidic Swampoo's less good against you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like, yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know like what the right way, if at all, to tech what this deck is, and like that specific card is like the one that I think that jumps to mind. But I don't know. I haven't really seen too much discussion about it. I haven't like seen it coming up in any top lists or anything like that, which is kind of a tell at this point, given how prevalent this deck is and how well it's doing. Like, if teching for the mirror was the right way to do it, people would be doing it already.
Or teching in that way, at least, yeah.
Teching that way, yeah. I mean, the decks are already teched for the mirror, basically.
Because they're teched for every deck. That's part of the effectiveness of the roguish tempo strategy, is that it kind of beats almost every single Hearthstone strategy, period.
Yeah, right.
Except for the super funky ones.
Yeah, right. It can still lose to some wacky stuff, but there's not a whole lot of that in the meta right now.
No, sadly. As much as I was enjoying making many, many Lucent Barks and how that was working for a brief period, it does not seem to be a thing. It's not the new Hadronox. So maybe you could also count that as a thing in this deck's favor, but I mean, it mostly sounds like we don't. Do we not have advice on how to beat this deck? Is this just a, if you can't beat them, join them situation?
I think that there's a couple pieces of advice. If you want to beat people in Hearthstone, play Lackey Rogue and get good at doing the mirror. So yeah, join him. But I mean, we can also talk about a beat him. But I think the specific join him advice, like, it's not just play this deck and win. The specific join him advice is like, don't trade as much as you think you want to. Trade less than you think you should. Just go face. Your opponent will kill their minions for you a lot of the time, and you'll be really happy that you went face, because when you eventually draw a bunch of damage cards, it's going to be lethal.
That sounds, yeah, the face of the place. That's that's evergreen advice right there.
Yeah, right. That is true Hearthstone advice. Just do not think, attack your opponent's face. So that is a hard lesson to learn.
But it
Um,
shines through in that mirror, like you said, how meaningful it is for actually winning that mirror.
yeah, it's true. Definitely. Also, actually, one card we didn't mention that is like relevant to basically that advice specifically is Life Drinker.
Ooh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, that is a card that is I think considered at this point like a must-have in the deck, and it's fantastic in this deck because it's reach. It puts you up life if you're playing in the mirror, and bouncing it with that Waggle Pick is awesome.
It's yeah, synergize with Wagglepick, the 3/3, another 3/3,
Yeah,
is a great body, and as the deck becomes more common and just having the life advantage means more, it just gets better.
definitely. Um, I think the other advice, which you can probably speak to more than I can, is playing Warrior and playing Control.
Yeah, it's a tough time out there against the rogues because I mean, really, like I said, they can do so many surprising, unpredictable, funky things depending on which cards they've decided to use, and then things like Leroy and Wagglepick can just be completely overwhelming. Um, and also, because of the lackeys, like that makes the whole like the plan of like brawls and warpath to just clear out your opponent's cards doesn't work as well when all of their cards are split into multiple cards.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Evil Miscreant will make two more minions, and then those two minions could make two plus more minions, and you only get advantage off of cards like Warpath and Brawl and AoE removal effects when you're getting rid of cards that your opponent committed to, and you'll be getting rid of portions of cards, and they can portion them out. That's the piece of
Yeah.
of like that's a big way that the deck is different from a token druid, because token druid is strong, but it definitely doesn't have the reach of Tempo Rogue. So that's one huge difference there. Like Token Druid, if it has a board, can do insane things with it with Savage War, no question. Like I guess their reach with if you give them a couple inches, they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
Token Druid. Um, Rogue might not be able to capitalize off of a couple inches as well, but Rogue can go from 0 to 60 in a way that Token Druid definitely can't.
It's true.
But the other thing is that Token Druid really will be committing cards in a meaningful way often, to try and fill out the board, because it'll play some big spells that are expensive that it doesn't have many copies of, that like Whispering Woods or to the Forest Aid, um, that when you get rid of them entirely with something like Warpath or Brawl, that's a big deal. Or if your opponent could even commit some buff spells. Your opponent could commit a Soul of the Forest, and you can still get through with Warpath. So you can actually count. Oh, I got rid of this card from my opponent, and this card, and this card, and this card. Even though they're still making multiple minions out of one card, you can still fight it like that. But rogues just like they play one card and they get one or two cards out of it, and they'll play one of those two and then get one or two, and so they can just feel you out and just portion their stuff out to kind of play around your brawls and warpaths. Or if you use your brawls and warpaths too early, then they just get you.
Yeah, they don't need to commit everything. They can commit like a little bit and do just enough damage with it and just sort of like, plink you for 4 or 5 every turn between their hero power and a couple low power, a couple lackeys and like a miscreant or something. Um, and then once you're forced to commit something to that, um, they can play the rest. But Warrior's in a great position because
it's not just Brawl and it's not just Warpath. It has like the Dynamatic. Um, it has like the hero, some of the hero powers from Doctor Boom will
Mm-hmm.
actually like help clear the board. Once Doctor Boom comes out, like every minion in your deck suddenly has Rush, which is amazing for fighting a tempo deck.
It's unreal.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like, and that's a world where like that deck is also running Ziliax. So I've lost many games where like I felt like I had enough reach to get through them, and then they just like play a mech and then magnetize it and then gain like a million life, and that's it.
Yeah, crafting mechs is pretty overpowered.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a really strong deck against this one. Uh, and that is like a really excellent. If you're trying to beat Lackey Rogue, like that's what you want to target. If you're going to target anything, that's a fantastic thing to target. Control is a good thing to play,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, put your seatbelt on because some of your games are going to be 40-minute games.
Yeah, if anyone else is playing the same deck as you, he'll have to buckle up, and it's still not a guarantee against Tempo Rogue or Lackey Rogue, though according to VS, the only decks that have a positive win rate in the metagame at all are the two warrior decks,
Yeah.
which is wild. Shout out to like Murloc Shaman and Zoo Warlock to being not that bad against
Hmm.
Lackey Rogue, but if your game plan is getting minions on the board and you're playing against Lackey Rogue, you're in for a tough time.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy time for you.
That's really,
Um,
I guess, one of the biggest other differences. But one of the biggest, like, if we're gonna be like, why are these warrior decks different from every other deck in the format? There's certainly the hero power and the cards like Dynamatic, but there's also the fact that they can, because of either trying to bomb your opponent or fatiguing your opponent, they're not actually that concerned about building up a board to win the game.
mm,
And that is one of the things that Rogue is very prepared to fight against. So that's kind of another, maybe more significant actually, reason why those two decks are beating Lackey Rogue is that they don't need to get stuff on the board to achieve their plan. They just need
it's
to
true.
play some wrench calibers and keep stuff off their opponent's board.
Yeah, it's most of the time that I've lost to those decks playing Rogue, it's because I've hit the concede button and not because they brought my life to zero. Because like
Mm.
there just comes a point where like you count the amount of damage your deck can do, and it's just not it's less than their life total, and that's the end of the game.
But that really, like, as much as I promote trying to think outside the box and finding other ways to do things, it's pretty tough for any class besides Warrior to put Rogue into that spot because they just have so much damage.
Yeah,
And they have a
it's
sap, so even if you were trying to build a wall, like Wall Priest or something like that, like you're still just at you're still just under their thumb because of that card.
yeah. I mean that's one nice advantage that Warrior has is like it's not really that weak to sap at all because it has so many clear board clears, and it's like I guess Shaman and Warrior are the only decks that have that kind of board clear right now, and Warrior I think just has like a much better suite of cards for playing control.
Definitely, especially after quality. I don't even like talking about that. I can't believe they did that to me. I feel
That is,
personally slighted.
yeah. I mean, um, I hope that they revert that someday.
Like Brawl should be 8 mana. Like if equality is
Yeah,
on the other hand, I try to remind myself that this is a compliment that I knew how good that card was the whole time, and they only recently admitted it. So I try to take it in stride, be like, they had to do that because it really was that good.
yeah, but I mean, it got nerfed. It got nerfed that hard because of the Baku and Gen. It's like it's frustrating because those are not in standard forever. They're not even in standard
mm,
anymore.
that's a rough way to think about it. I don't think about it that way, but thinking that equality could be 3 and that it's not just because of those two guys is a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, because I think at three, yeah, that would be a fine nerf, and the card would still be like glorious. But
It would be glorious at 3. Now I'm picturing it.
yeah, um,
Might
That's
still
unfortunate.
still probably wouldn't be enough to keep up with this rogue deck though.
No, I
Yeah,
don't think so at all.
I mean, I think Join 'em is probably the pick here.
Yeah.
It's probably the waggle pick here, but it looks like there might like Murloc Shaman and Zoo Warlock are coming close to evening out the win rates and being at an equal win rate against this rogue deck. So that if you're looking for inspiration, maybe Token Druid as well. Um,
Yeah,
so
Token might be a
actually,
sleeper here.
wait, what's that?
Token Druid might be a sleeper here.
Yes, that's
It's
another one. It doesn't have VS doesn't have data on it, but I would think something where you are making like an insane amount of guys and making them big and chubby in an efficient way could actually be good against this rogue deck.
I think so. Because Rogue is like this Rogue deck can't really deal with like a bunch of 2/2s. Like it's not equipped to deal with like 6/2/2s. It can like win through them, but like if those 2/2s come about early enough, this deck is not going to have a good time
Yeah, if
in
they
that
show up
matchup.
all at once.
Yeah, yeah, and if they show up before your before the Rogue has assembled lethal damage or like a plan to deal lethal damage.
Yeah, that's one of the things though is that too often it's too late.
Oh yeah, because this deck can just it can deal so much damage so quickly. And like there aren't, there's some Tar Creeper right now. There's like not really any speed bump that's there to stop it from just going face.
Yeah, what's his name? There's like a lone defender or something like that.
Oh, the 2/4.
Yeah, 2/6.
Yeah. Oh, the bigger one. Yeah, he's around, but he's not Tar Creeper.
Yeah, he's just not cutting it. He definitely looks like he's good, and I think he is lone. I think it's lone
I think he's
defender.
good too.
He's good, but he's not Tar Creeper.
No,
Um,
it's too, um, Tar Creeper is amazing, but also like the Lone Defender guy is just very weak to sap in a way that Tar Creeper isn't. Because Tar
yep,
Creeper is like cheaper.
yep.
Uh,
You
and
don't
Tar
feel
Creeper also
good.
doesn't ask anything of you. That guy does.
Yeah, it's just not the same.
Nope. Yeah, I think join him is the way to go, but like, we'll have to see. So I think another point of discussion, if that's where we're going, is anything going to change? If so, what?
I think that decks like Token Druid, Murloc Shaman, decks that aren't weak to sap, essentially, is what that means. Decks that aren't weak to point removal and single target effects might continue to develop. Dreamway Guardians making 2/1/2 lifesteals is really good against this rogue deck.
It's true. They
So,
have to spend multiple cards to deal with that.
and it can also fight against the reach. So it's got
Yeah.
something going for it, and I think that those decks will probably get refined more and become more popular in response to this abundance of the rogue deck being played, and probably also more development and innovation with Warrior.
Hmm.
Um, and then my hope is that some unpredictable stuff with like Paladin or Priest or something like that, because I think they're mostly just sitting on their hands. But I would love to be playing Wild Pyromancer in one of those classes, or find some kind of way for one of those decks to work between Kangar's Endless Army and the Priest Resurrect effects. It seems plausible that something that doesn't have to build the board could work, which is kind of what Warrior has going for it. If you're okay with your board getting wrecked and that actually makes your plan work, then that could be good against these road decks as well. But it's gonna take a lot.
Yeah.
I,
It's
I think Rogue is mostly just gonna keep kicking ass.
I think so too. I mean, I don't like this is an incredibly young meta, so I don't think it's correct to just assume it's going to be stationary. But I do think that if there was a solution to this deck, it would have happened already. So I think that this is probably going to be the strongest deck for the rest of the expansion.
hmm
Will we see nerfs?
Probably, but not soon. But I would have to guess that if this one deck sort of maintains this, Jade Rogue type position where they did nerfs in the past, just on precedent, it's reasonable to assume they would do it again.
Mhm.
And I think also they haven't, in the past like year or two, needed to nerf Rogue that much, and they haven't nerfed Rogue that much. The Caverns Below, I think you could just consider that as like a complete exception. They've nerfed that card more than once, which once again I take as a compliment.
That's amazing.
But I think you could just not even consider that a rogue card as far as rogue cards getting nerfed historically, and I think a lot of other classes have gotten hit just almost like arbitrarily, like Hex got nerfed. And the equality nerf in some ways is like maybe like you could say it's erroneous in certain ways or not rational because the cards that it was nerfed for ultimately aren't around anyway, or the reason it was nerfed the way it was aren't around anyway. So I think because of those reasons they would even be more willing to hit Rogue on a card or two.
Yeah, I mean, so which do we think here? If I had to, I'll make two guesses. Waggle Pick will go to 5 mana. That's one guess.
Oh my.
And I think that would actually, that would do a really good job of quieting this deck down a little bit.
It sure would.
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether it would kill it, but I definitely think it would take it off of its dominant post, and the resulting changes in the metagame might be enough to kill it. My second guess would be changing the way that Dread Corsair's cost reduction works.
Oh, so like make it durability or just something completely different?
Yeah, or cap the amount that it can be reduced. I don't know if they would do that because the two arguments would be it's a classic card, so that changes everything forever. And I think they'd like to avoid doing that. Or I imagine they would like to avoid doing that. And the second argument would be in order to get a really fine-tuned nerf, something reduce it, but to a maximum of 2 less, it put a lot of extra text on the card, and that is a templating issue, but also it's a classic card, so it should be a little easier to understand. And it's not very Hearthstone-y to have a lot of text on one cards. These are all very simple cards.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think the much more likely thing is the Waggle Pick nerf.
I would agree that that's the most likely, most reasonable nerf is something a Waggle Pick, whether it is a 5 mana card or a 3/2 weapon at 4.
Oh, that would be a good way to deal with Dread Corsair as well.
Oh yeah, because it would cost 1. I didn't even think of that.
That's fantastic. That might be way better than going to 5.
Treat it like Wrench Caliber, see how they feel. That was where my thought came from, but no, that then makes the turn 4 thing not this completely obscene, the 3 blue eyes in one turn.
Yeah.
So that's my first thought, but also, honestly, very close behind is Evil Miscreant.
Yeah, that was another thing I was thinking of.
That card could be nerfed in a number of ways. I think it could be a 1/1 and still would get played all the time.
Oh yeah, 3, yeah, absolutely. It barely matters that it's a 1/5, especially because some of the lackeys can just change it to a different minion.
Right, but the fact that it's a 1/5 is fucking insane sometimes.
Yeah.
So that could be a reasonable nerf, something to the Miscreant, or even Raiding Party. I think is another it's really, really, really good in the deck. It's only in Rogue. It's also really swingy and can also feel really bad to be playing against if you're they had prep Raiding Party again. So that also, if we take this perspective where the company Blizzard and we don't just care about the win rates of cards, we also care about how people feel. This, I think, can also potentially be a feels bad card.
I think that's a really good point. I don't think they'll hit Miscreant because, Lackeys is some synergy that they have, and there are cards that synergize with Lackeys. So, it would hit this deck, but it would also hit other decks. I think that they would go for something like Raiding Party or Waggle Pick. I really like bringing Waggle Pick to 3/2, by the way. That's my favorite. That's my pick. I'm changing that to my pick.
Yeah, we can agree on that one. And I didn't mean
Yeah.
changing the lackeys themselves. I meant changing Evil Miscreant.
Yeah, that's what I mean though. Is like if you make that card worse, any lackey based strategy is dampened. So like
In Rogue.
that, yes, and that's a mechanic they pushed for Rogue.
Okay, yeah, I'll give you that. Though, like, on the other hand, even when you make this deck less of an obnoxious Leroy Tempo deck and make it into more of a combo-y lackey deck, it still is really unfair.
Yeah, it's a very very strong card. But I think that like it's a strong enabler, and like I think that's okay. Because this is the class that can like take advantage of it the most. So I think it's fair to give them, the strongest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they've shown. You're right. They've shown, and I think it makes sense. I like that they do this. That if it is in some way meaningful to these other cool synergies, they would like to lay off tampering with it.
Yeah.
And the also, I think they don't like it. Like, if they can avoid it, they'd rather nerf an older card than a newer card. Because like nerfing a newer card is kind of like if you nerf a new card, it means you haven't learned anything. To some extent, like, I'm not saying maybe I'm saying definitely that that's true. And so that's another reason to maybe go for Raiding Party.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that like designing, card evaluation is hard, and that's both true for the designers and for the players. So I think that if they make a newer, I think there's some advantages to nerfing a newer card. There's some disadvantages. Disadvantages that changes around for a long time. Advantage is that like eventually the card will rotate. Whereas if they nerf an older card, if they nerf a classic card, then that's around forever. Then again, something like Raiding Party is nice because it's neither classic nor did it just come out. So they can nerf it and say like, well, we never saw this coming, and it's not like we nerfed this new cool synergistic card that we pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
We're just nerfing kind of an old thing that we made offhandedly.
Yeah, I think that's what they would like to do, but if a card is too strong, i.e. Waggle Pick, they might not be able to do that, and they'll be forced to nerf the newer card. And another reason to leave Raiding Party alone, I mean, look at it. It's so cute. It's still put some pirates in a weapon and from your deck to your hand. Like, it's such an innocent, combo-y, fun-looking card that could never be a problem.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's neat because it's actually seen play in multiple decks now that had vastly different strategies. Kingsbane and now this one.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I guess I need to dial back maybe my lack of rogue nerfing. Though once again, in my defense, that's kind of not even like a rogue deck in the same way that Caverns Below is. They're both rogue decks in the same way, and they're both not tempo rogue decks at all.
Yeah, they I mean, part of the reason that they nerf that they nerf the Kingsbane deck, specifically the Lifesteal card, is because it was not roguelike. Like, Rogue is not supposed to be able to protect its life or gain life back very well.
Especially not by smacking people with a giant weapon. That's like definitely a Death Knight's job, not a rogue.
Yeah, right. That's like, Jaraxxus or a warrior at least.
Or like Dark when you play the Death Knight Uther. That's Uther. What you get. You get a big weapon with lifesteal. That's very different from just like a generic rogue thing.
Yeah, it's not roguelike at all. But yeah, I think I would be pretty surprised if this deck didn't see some kind of balance adjustment, though I agree with you that I think we're not going to see it like super soon. I think that they're going to let this one fester for another couple weeks, which I also think is the correct choice.
Yeah, it's not over 60% in either of the numbers, or at least it hasn't been consistently. It's still less bad than Jade Druid last time, and I think still, like you said, very young metagame.
Super young.
It's too early to call it, like we can bring it back. We can revive life here. There's a lot more development to be done, a lot more to be learned.
Yeah, this isn't like the last set of a year. This is the first set of a new year. So like in the last set of a year, everybody knows what the strongest cards are. Like, when that set comes out, it's going to have the smallest impact of any set that came out that year because it's being added on top of the largest card pool. So if you imagine all cards have the same, expected value, and it's like inversely proportional to the total number of cards, there's the most cards. All those cards are going to have a small change. But also, like, people have kind of figured out the strongest stuff to do. Like, decks have come and gone, and the decks that are around are like ultra refined versions of the strongest strategies. So if the meta doesn't change very much, or one of those strategies gets a new card and just sort of like skyrockets in popularity, it's usually pretty obvious that it's going to just stay like that. This is a world where, like, we probably haven't even seen all the best decks yet.
Yeah, it's kind of, but at the same time hard to imagine, having played ladder every day and trying new things and seeing seeing new spins on old things constantly, that there will be a completely different thing, but it happens every time.
Yeah, every time. It's I mean, it would not be the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. So yeah, I think it's too early to call. I think it'll be another 1.5 to 2 months before we see any balance changes.
But yeah, I would agree with that. But at the same time, I would also bet money that right now people at Blizzard are testing Waggle picks that have 3 power and Waggle picks that cost 5, and maybe even raiding parties that do something different, cost 4, or get 1 less pirate. Like they just draw you 1 pirate, or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. That's a tough card to nerf, actually. Now that you because on its front face, it would be so bad if it just drew 1 pirate for 3 mana.
What if it was 2 mana?
That's interesting. They seldom do that. They seldom change the card in more than one way. But if it were 2 mana, just drew 1 pirate, then that would be very interesting.
Yeah, they don't like completely making it it almost becomes a completely different card if you change the text too much, and they don't like that, because they kind of, and I appreciate this, they took sort of this artistic responsibility. They're like, this is what this is. This is what Raiding Party is. And they feel some responsibility to the players to have integrity and keep that honest, and keep, we said this is what Raiding Party is, we're going to keep this what Raiding Party is. And if you tweak the text too much, that doesn't work out. I think they did that with patches. They tweaked it too much, sadly. I don't know what else they could have done. They needed Rush, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think patches is a good example. And I agree with you that they tend to not change too much about the card. I also think that's an interesting meta design decision, when you have a game about building a collection of things like cards, to not change them is it makes them more real, I guess. It makes their identity more static. It's not like League of Legends, where I own these champions that are just constantly changing. It's it's a different game where I have Sap's always going to be Sap, Viscerate's always going to be Viscerate. One day they might cost more mana or less mana, but they're not going to do something different.
It's an important part of the game that is easy to forget about.
Oh yeah, but it makes it more analogous to paper card games, which I think it makes it easier for the player base to quickly understand it, and makes it more accessible.
It makes it more fun.
Yeah,
that's relevant every now and then when I'm playing this game. Am I having fun?
Oh yeah, that was an important lesson for me to learn when I was doing the League of Legends ranked ladder many, many years ago. Is if the first time I get upset at something that happens, literally upset, that is my last game of the day.
Yeah, that's maybe a good piece of parting advice, is if you get upset trying to beat Rogue, it's either time to take a break, or, like we said, you can join them.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable place to end. Yeah. I mean, if you like our content, please follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/LasterNHS, or facebook.com/LasterNHS. If you happen to still use Facebook, you can send minion memes to us about rogue nerfs or something.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I would actually really unironically love that. But if Otherwise, you can get our content on all kinds of places like iTunes or Google Play. We happen to be hosted on SoundCloud, so you can find us there at soundcloud.com/last turn. You could just search Last Turn on iTunes or Google Play and we'll come up, which is pretty cool.
It
And you can
is.
also go to lastturnhs.com. We have links to like all of our relevant stuff there, including our YouTube channel, which has our podcast is also hosted there. So if you're the kind of person who likes to listen to podcasts on YouTube, which I absolutely can understand,
I
then
do that.
yeah, I've heard people talk snidely about it, but I totally do that.
It's convenient in some, like, certain podcasts, you want to watch them. Like, the people are that engaging, or sometimes they're showing stuff that they're talking about.
Yeah, and or like I think that a lot of YouTubers fall in this camp where like actually, 70% or more of the value of the video is in the audio. And so if you have the audio playing in the background, like ContraPoints is a good example. So like ContraPoints fun to watch because she does a lot of really cool costumes, but if you just listen to the audio, you get like the vast majority of the value out of each episode. Anyway, you can
Just
find our
like
podcast on
us.
YouTube, just like us. So uh you can find us on YouTube. And yeah, in the meantime, good luck trying to beat Rogue. It's definitely the best deck right now.
That is definitely clear. If you have any tips that you'd like to share with us, or thoughts, comments, questions, tweet us, Facebook us. We're also on Instagram, once again, at
Mm,
Last Turn HS. You can find us in all those places.
yeah, totally. And until next time, we will see you next turn.
See you next turn, folks.